Hello and welcome back. Today I'm going to be doing another lab in Boson NetSim. I'm Benjamin Williams, and today we're going to be doing spanning tree MST configuration. So this should be a pretty fun lab. Let's go ahead and get into our objective. So it says convert each virtual LAN VLAN per VLAN spanning tree PVST group over to a single instance of spanning tree by using multiple spanning tree MST. So here's our topology that we have. We have two PCs connected up to our access layer switches. From there, we have our distribution layer switches connected up. And then we have our connection to our core switches. And then we have two routers, as we can see. So our access layer switches are going to give access to our endpoints like our PCs or surveillance cameras or any other devices. So like I said, the access layer is going to give those endpoints connectivity to the network. I distribute, and they're going to be in charge. The access layer is going to usually be in charge of our security because they give access to endpoints. And as well, they're going to be configured for QoS settings as well because we want to do QoS as close to the edge as possible. From there, we have our distribution layer switches. They're going to be in charge of aggregating all of our access switches. And this from here, from the distribution layer is where we convert from layer 2 to layer 3. So our access layer, of course, that's going to be layer 2, but at a distribution layer, usually in an enterprise network, that's where you kind of transition to layer 3. And then we have our distribution layer switches, not our distribution, our core switches that are going to be in charge of routing our information to the internet edge or to the WAN edge or to the data center just outside of our local subnet. So that's going to be in charge of the core switches are going to be in charge of that. We have some redundancy throughout this network, as we can see, with the two Ethernet connections. And those are good to have in case one of these links goes down. It'll have another path to get to the switch. And STP is going to block one of these ports to prevent layer 2 loops from occurring within our topology. Now, with this actual topology here, we're going to be running STP on all of these switches. It's just for lab purposes. This is just a lab. From all of my readings, I've never seen core switches have STP running on them. I don't know any real world application that this would consist of, but it's always good to lab up different topologies and see different things. So I've already read through all of the commands and also the descriptions for this lab. So let's go ahead and get into our configuration steps. So we're going to keep our topology up here in the top left. We're going to be doing all of our reading up here at the top right. And then we're going to be doing our CLI configurations down here at the bottom. So let's go ahead and get into the first lab task. So it says your network engineer has determined that VLANs 1 through 3 represent half of the traffic on the network and VLANs 4 through 6 represent the other half. He also noticed that the majority of traffic is concentrated on communication between the workstations on the network and not out to the internet. At this time, the network has been split up into 6 VLANs, with VLANs 1 through 3 being sent through D-Switch 1 and VLANs 4 through 6 being sent through D-Switch 2. Splitting the network optimized spanning tree protocol traffic patterns based on the network engineer's findings. In this lab, you will further optimize the STP algorithm. So basically what it's saying is we have 6 VLANs. Half of those VLANs are using D-Switch 1 as their root bridge, and the other half, which is 4 through 6, is using D-Switch 2 as its root bridge. So let's go ahead and get into task 1. It says task 1, plan the mitigation from PVST to MST. In this task, you will determine the state of MST or STP in the network and plan mitigations from PVST to MST. So step number 1, it says determine the states of STP running on the network by answering the following questions. So we're going to go ahead and start on A. So it says how many instances of STP are running on each switch? Well, I would say that there are 6 STP instances running on each switch. And let me go ahead and bring my iPad up so we can actually write these answers down and then check them at the last, once we complete all of these steps. So let's go ahead and bring our iPad up now. Got my iPad ready with my pencil. So how many instances of STP are running on each switch? Well, we're going to go ahead and say 6, and let's confirm that in the CLI. Let's go to A switch 1. We're already on it. So let's go to A switch 1 just to confirm. Let's do an enable, enable. Let's do a show spanning tree. All right, so we can see VLAN 1, that's running one instance of spanning tree because we're doing per VLAN spanning tree. So each VLAN is going to have its own STP topology. So we see VLAN 2, VLAN 3, VLAN 4, VLAN 5, and VLAN 6. Yes, so we have 6 instances of STP running on this switch. Perfect. Okay, let's go ahead and go to question B, which is asking, are the switches running PVST or MST mode? Well, we can see right here in the output that it says that we're running PVST. So let's go ahead and put that for B, PVST. Okay, let's move on to C. It says how many VLANs are configured on the switches. Well, we can see right here that each switch has 6 VLANs. So let's go ahead and put 6 for D. And we can confirm that if we do a show VLAN brief. But like I said, we can see it right here in the output as well. So let's go ahead and move on to D. It says how many VLAN groups are configured on the distribution switches. So let's head over to D switch 1 right now. And let's do a enable and let's do a show run. And yeah, so we can see right here that we have 2 groups that are configured on the distribution layer switches, and one of those groups is VLANs 1 through 3, and the other group is VLANs 4 through 6. So we have 2 groups configured. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to E. It says how many VLANs are in each group. So there are 3 VLANs in each group because we have 1 through 3, which is 3, and then we have 4 through 6 for group 2. So that's another 3. So how many VLANs are in each group? We have 3 VLANs in each group. Let me put 3 VLANs each group. Okay. And it also asks what VLANs are in each group. So we have 1 through 3 for group 1. And we have 4 through 6 for group 2. Perfect. Let's go ahead and move on to F. F is asking which switch is the primary route for each VLAN group. So we can see right here that it looks as if D switch 1 is the root bridge for group number 1, and it looks like D switch 2 is the secondary. And we can confirm this. Let's go ahead and let's do a show spanning tree. So we can see that it's the root. D switch 1 is the root for VLAN 1. It is the root for VLAN 2. And it is the root for VLAN 3. That's what I figured. And 4 through 6 is root bridge would be D switch 2. So which switch is the primary route for each VLAN? So D switch 1, we put D switch 1 is the primary for group 1, which has VLANs 1 through 3. And let's go over to D switch 2 just to confirm. Let's do a enable show spanning tree. Okay, and let's see for VLAN 4, as we can see right here, it is the root bridge, and it's not for VLAN 3 because D switch 1 is the root for VLAN 3. So D switch 2 is the root for VLAN 4. It's the root for VLAN 5, and it is the root for VLAN 6, like we thought. Perfect. So let's go ahead and put D switch 2 is the primary for group 2. Okay, and let's go on to G now. G is asking, what can you do to minimize the number of STP instances running on the switches while still maintaining the same consistency in the network? Well, what you can do to minimize the number of STP instances is to go ahead, STP instances is to go ahead and group all of those STP instances into a MST group. So it'll have the same topology, but it'll be less STP instances running. So you can group all of VLANs 1 through 3 into a single MST instance, and then that instance will be stored on each switch instead of 6 different instances being stored on each switch. So we're going to have 2 instances in total if we convert over to MST. So let's go ahead and write that. Let's go ahead and just put convert to MST. Okay, perfect. Now let's go ahead and move on to number 2. It says, in task 2, you will use the following information to create the same number of instances of MST as there were PVST groups to assign the same numbers to the instances as those in the current group. So it says, no, right here, it says how many instances of MST must be created. So we just said that we're going to have 2 instances. So let's go ahead and write that. Let's go ahead and move on to B. It says which device will be the primary root for the instances. So D switch 1 will be primary for MST group 1, or instance 1, I should say instance 1, and D switch 2 will be the primary for MST instance 2. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to C. It says which devices will be the secondary root for the instances. Well, we know that D switch 1 will be the secondary for MST instance 2, and D switch 2 will be secondary for MST instance 1. Okay, and let's go ahead and move on to D. D is asking which VLAN should be assigned to the instances. So MST1 should have VLANs 1 through 3, and MST2 should have the VLANs 4 through 6. And that way we have 2 MST instances with all of our VLANs. Instead of 6 different instances running with per VLAN spanning tree, we can cut that down to 2 different instances stored on each switch. So that's what we want. So before we go ahead and get into implementing this into the CLI, let's first check our answers that we did for number 1 and 2. So for number 1, we can see that it's saying how many instances of STP were running. Well, we just said 6 STP instances were running, and that was our answer for A. So we got that one correct. Moving on, it says the switches are running PVST mode, which we had for number 2, or B, I should say. And let's go ahead and move on to C. It says 6 VLANs are configured on the switches. We got 6 right there. Okay. Let's go ahead and go on to D. It says, by reviewing the running config on D switch 1 or D switch 2, you can determine that the distribution switches have 2 VLAN groups configured. And we put 2. So that's good. Let's go ahead and move on to E. E says there are 2 VLAN groups with 3 VLANs in each group. So we said we got 3 VLANs in each group, which is right. And VLANs 1 through 3 are in group 1, and VLANs 4 to 6 are in the other group. So we said 1 through 3 group 1, 4 through 6 group 2. So perfect. In F, we said that D switch 1 is the primary root for VLANs 1 through 3. So we can see that right there. VLAN D switch 1 would be right up here, I should say. D switch 1 is the primary for group 1 for VLANs 1 through 3, which is what we have. And we said D switch 2 is the primary for VLANs 4 through 6. As we can see, D switch 2 is the primary for group 2. Okay, perfect. Let's go ahead and move on to G. G is saying it says you can implement MST to minimize the number of STP instances running on the switches while still maintaining the same consistency in the network. So we said that right here. We said we could just convert it to MST. So perfect. Let's go ahead and move on to question number 2. It said 2 instances of MST must be created, which we have right there. It says D switch 1 will be the primary root for VLANs 1 through 3, which is what we have. D switch 1 would be the primary for MST instance number 1. And D switch 2 will be the primary root for VLANs 4 through 6, or instance number 2, which is what we have right here. It says D switch 2 will be the primary MST for instance number 2. Okay, for C, it was saying, it says D switch 1 will be the secondary root for VLANs 4 through 6, which is what we have. We said D switch 1 will be the secondary, and D switch 2 will be the secondary for VLANs 1 through 3. And we can see D switch 2 will be the secondary for MST instance number 1. So that's perfect. And let's go ahead and move on to D. It said VLANs 1 through 6 should be assigned to the instances. So we can see that MST1 will have VLANs 1 through 3, and MST2 will have VLANs 4 through 6. So perfect. Let's go ahead and get into the implementation. Let's move our iPad over to the side and out of the way now, since we won't be needing that. Okay. So let's go ahead and move on to task 2. It says implement and verify MST, or implement and verify PVST to MST migration. In this task, you will use the plan you created in task 1 to convert each VLAN group over to a single instance of spanning tree. So it says using the following parameters, convert VLAN 1 through 3 over to a single MST instance. So like I said, in a normal network, you wouldn't be running MST all the way up to the core. But in this lab, that's what it wants us to do. So we're going to configure first MST on all of these switches. So let's do a configure terminal on a switch 1. Let's start over here. And let's do a spanning tree mode MST. Perfect. Let's go ahead and move on to a switch 2. Let's go to here. Let's go ahead and enable. Let's do a configure terminal. And let's do a spanning tree mode MST. Okay. It's going to convert this one over because it's running PVST2. Let's do a configure terminal. Let's do a spanning tree MST mode, or MST, spanning tree mode MST. Okay. Let's do the same thing over here on D switch 2. Configure terminal, spanning, if I can spell, spanning tree mode MST. Perfect. And on our core switches, let's just make sure that let's do a show spanning tree. Yep. So as we can see, we still have all of our VLANs over here. So let's do a configure terminal, and let's do a spanning tree mode MST because it was running PVST right here. And let's do the same thing on core switch 2. Let's do an enable. Let's do a show spanning tree to make sure that we're still running spanning tree up to the core, which we are. We see all 6 VLANs and they're running PVST, as we can see right here. So let's do a configure terminal, conf t, and let's do a spanning tree mode MST. Okay, all of our switches are now running MST. So let's start with the MST configuration that it wants. So on a switch 1, let's do a spanning tree MST config. In the MST configuration mode, let's do a name of group 1. Let's do a revision of 1, and let's do an instance of 1 with VLANs 1 through 3. Perfect. And let's do a show pending. And as we can see, we have the correct group name, we have the revision number of number 1, and we can see our MST instance right here. For MST instance number 1, it has VLANs 1 through 3, which is what we want. So now if we hit an exit, that is going to be saved. So let's go ahead and move on to D switch, or a switch 2, I should say. Let's do a spanning tree mode, MST config, and let's do a name of group 1. Let's do a revision of 1, and let's do an instance of 1 for VLANs 1 through 3. Let's do a show pending to make sure everything is correct. We can see the correct name, which is group 1. We can see that we have the correct revision number, which is 1, and we can see our MST instance, which holds VLANs 1 through 3, which is what we want. So let's hit an exit to save that. Let's do the same configuration over here on D switch 1. Let's go ahead and pick it up a little bit. I'm not going to do the show pinning anymore because we already know what it's going to output. So let's do a spanning tree MST config. And let's do a name of group 1. Let's do a revision of 1. And let's do a instance of 1 for VLANs 1 through 3. And let's just do an exit. Let's do the same thing on D switch 2. Let's do a spanning tree MST config. Let's do a name of group 1. Let's do a revision of 1. And let's do an instance of 1 for VLANs 1 through 3. Let's do an exit to save that. Let's move on to our core switch 1. Let's do a spanning tree MST config. Let's do a name of group 1. Let's do a revision of 1. And let's do an instance of 1 for VLANs 1 through 3. And let's do an exit. And let's do the final config on core switch 2. Let's do a spanning tree MST config. Let's do a name of group 1. Let's do a revision of 1. And let's do an instance, finally, of 1 for VLANs 1 through 3. And let's do an exit. Perfect. So right here it says, before implementing your changes, you can verify your MST configuration. What command can you use to accomplish this? Well, we've seen that on A switch 1, we did the show pending, and it showed us our pending configuration before we actually configured it. So that's what it's asking right there. What is the effect on the priorities of all switches when you change the mode from PVST mode to MST mode? Well, once you change, you're going to go back to your default settings. And I believe the default priority is 32,768. Let's confirm that over here. Let's just do a, oops, didn't mean to drag the instructions all the way down. Let's do a do show spanning tree to check out our priority. And yeah, the priority is 32,768. So it's going to go back to its default. So let's go on to question 3. It says configure the root primary and root secondary for MST instance for VLANs 1 through 3. So if you remember, we're going to configure D switch 1 to be the primary for MST instance number 1, and D switch 2 is going to be our backup, and it's going to be the opposite for MST instance number 2. But let's go ahead and make this configuration. Let's do a spanning tree MST 1, and let's do a root primary. Okay, let's go ahead and go to D switch 2. Let's do a spanning tree MST 1 root secondary. Perfect. All right, now it says using the following parameters, convert VLANs 4 through 6 over to a single MST instance. So here are the credentials that it wants for VLANs 4 through 6. It wants a group of 1, a revision of 1, and an instance of 2. So let's go ahead and start on A switch 1 first. Let's do a spanning tree MST config. Let's do a name of group 1. Let's do a revision of 1. Something's going on with my... No, don't tell me it froze. Do not tell me it froze. Come on now. Is my keyboard... Is there something? It's something going on with NetSim. As we can see, I'm hitting the enter. My cursor is down here, but it's not giving me any output. Let's refresh. No, it's going to make me start all the way over. No way it's going to make me start all the way over. And it is. Wow. You have got to be joking me. Yeah, it's going to make me start all the way over. Okay, well, let me get the configuration back to where it was. We know where we were at. So let me get the configuration back to where it was, and I'm going to upload a separate video of me doing this configuration for VLANs 4 through 6. I'm not going to redo this whole entire video. So I'm going to pause right here and be right back.